Jim Carrey stood outside the courthouse, the buzz of cameras and whispers fading into the background. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day he would finally confront the dark secret that had shadowed his career for years. What happened wasn't just bad luck or industry politics. It was a calculated campaign to destroy him. A powerful man, P. Diddy, stood accused of orchestrating a smear that cost Jim a career-defining role. As the courthouse doors opened, Jim's resolve hardened. This was his fight for justice, truth, and reclaiming his life. For decades, Jim Carrey had been one of Hollywood's most beloved and versatile actors. A man whose infectious energy, razor-sharp wit, and heartfelt performances had won him legions of fans across the globe. From his breakthrough roles in comedies to critically acclaimed dramatic turns, Jim had crafted a career that seemed invincible. But beneath the surface, a dark undercurrent was slowly building, one that threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. It all began subtly. At first, Jim noticed minor delays in scripts being delivered, meetings getting postponed or canceled without clear reasons. Then, promising opportunities began slipping through his fingers. Roles he was perfectly suited for went to unknown actors, and projects that once seemed destined for success fizzled out mysteriously. Industry insiders, some of whom he'd worked with for years, suddenly became evasive, offering vague excuses or avoiding him altogether. For a man used to the spotlight but also to a level of respect, these developments were confusing and alarming. What felt like professional hiccups soon turned into a pattern too consistent to ignore. Rumors began to spread, quiet whispers of behind-the-scenes sabotage, carefully planted stories in the tabloids, and a subtle campaign to tarnish Jim's reputation. The once vibrant glow of his career was dimming, and no one seemed willing to say why. Determined to understand the root of the problem, Jim took matters into his own hands. He enlisted the help of some of the industry's most skilled private investigators and legal experts. What they uncovered was staggering: a coordinated effort aimed at undermining Jim's career, orchestrated by forces with immense resources and influence. At the heart of the conspiracy was Sean P. Diddy Combs, a mogul whose reach extended beyond music into film, fashion, and business. According to the evidence, Diddy had deployed a campaign of professional sabotage and character assassination against Jim. Confidential emails showed strategic plans to block Jim from casting opportunities. Industry insiders reported pressure from Diddy's associates to distance themselves from Jim. Leaked documents revealed efforts to spread damaging rumors, both personal and professional. One of the most devastating blows was the loss of a lead role in a high-profile film that was expected to revive Jim's career and push him into a new era of success. The role, which had been initially offered to Jim, was suddenly given to a lesser-known actor with connections to Diddy's circle. The reasons behind the switch were murky, but the timing and pattern suggested deliberate interference. Further investigations revealed more insidious tactics. Fake negative reviews were circulated to tarnish Jim's public image. Private meetings among casting directors and producers were influenced by Diddy's network to exclude Jim from upcoming projects. Even attempts were made to turn longtime friends and collaborators against him through subtle threats and financial incentives. The psychological toll on Jim was immense. The stress and betrayal led to moments of self-doubt and isolation. He saw longtime friends pull away, unsure whether they could risk their careers by associating with him. He grappled with the painful reality that success in Hollywood wasn't just about talent. It was often about power, alliances, and silence. Despite these challenges, Jim's spirit remained unbroken. He resolved to fight back, not just to reclaim lost roles or repair his reputation, but to challenge the corrupt forces controlling the industry's backstage. With mounting evidence in hand, Jim and his legal team prepared for a battle that would pit one of Hollywood's brightest stars against one of its most powerful moguls. The trial, quickly became one of the most watched in recent history. Media outlets from around the world flocked to cover the courtroom drama. Fans and industry insiders alike followed every revelation, every testimony, every emotional moment. It was more than a legal dispute. It was a fight for truth, justice, and the soul of an industry. As Jim took his place in the courtroom on that first day, the weight of years of struggle and betrayal settled on him. But so did a fierce determination. This was his moment to finally speak out, to reveal the dark underbelly of a world he loved, and to stand up for himself and all those who had been silenced by power. The quiet storm that had begun to brew behind the scenes now began to take shape in full view. Jim Carrey's life and career were being systematically dismantled, and the evidence of this campaign was starting to surface in disturbing clarity. It started with whispers, subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Industry insiders began talking in hushed tones about sudden shifts in casting decisions, unexpected changes in project lineups, and a palpable reluctance among producers and directors to work with Jim. What once seemed like the usual ebb and flow of Hollywood fortunes was now clearly something orchestrated. Jim's legal team uncovered a web of influence and manipulation that pointed directly to P. Diddy and his inner circle. Meetings between influential executives and casting directors revealed pressures exerted to exclude Jim from key roles. Documents showed that Diddy's associates had systematically spread damaging rumors about Jim's professionalism and reliability, ensuring that he was blacklisted from several major productions. One particularly painful episode was the loss of a lead role in a high-profile film that many believed would redefine Jim's career. Initially offered the part, Jim was abruptly dropped under vague pretenses. Behind the scenes, Diddy's team had pushed to replace him with a lesser-known actor linked to their network. The move was strategic, designed to ensure Jim's continued sidelining. Further evidence showed a coordinated campaign to undermine Jim's reputation. Leaked private emails were selectively edited and published, distorting his words and intentions. Negative reviews appeared almost overnight, fueled by planted stories that painted Jim in a volatile and unprofessional light. Social media was weaponized, with bots and fake accounts amplifying the smear. The impact on Jim was profound. Opportunities dried up, and his public image took a hit. Friends who once stood by him were pressured to distance themselves. The isolation was palpable. But Jim refused to let this campaign define him. He fought back by gathering allies, former colleagues, trusted friends, and industry insiders willing to speak out. Together, they pieced together a dossier that exposed the depth and breadth of Diddy's covert operations. As the trial began, this dossier became central to the prosecution's case. Legal experts detailed the tactics used: sabotage, slander, blacklisting, and manipulation of public perception. The courtroom was shown evidence of covert communications, payment records, and internal memos outlining the campaign's objectives. Jim's testimony recounted his shock and disbelief as the layers of betrayal were peeled back. "I never imagined someone I respected could go to such lengths to destroy me," he said, voice steady, but filled with pain. "But the truth is clear. This was a deliberate attempt to erase me." The defense mounted a vigorous counterattack. They claimed Jim's career setbacks were the result of industry trends and his own choices. They questioned the credibility of witnesses and dismissed the evidence as circumstantial. Yet, the mounting proof made their arguments increasingly difficult to sustain. The trial became a high-stakes battle, with every detail scrutinized and every motive questioned. Jim stood firm, determined to reclaim not only his career, but his dignity and voice. The courtroom's atmosphere was dense with anticipation as Jim Carrey returned to the stand. Months of legal wrangling, revelations, and mounting evidence had led to this moment, the emotional core of the trial. This was no longer about contracts or business deals. It was about the man behind the fame, the cost of betrayal, and the unseen wounds inflicted by a campaign of ruin. Jim's usual animated energy was tempered by a profound seriousness. His eyes scanned the jury, seeking understanding beyond mere facts, a connection to the human story behind the headlines. His voice, steady but heavy with emotion, began to unravel the toll the ordeal had taken. "This wasn't just about missing out on a film," he said quietly. "It was about watching your life unravel in slow motion, about losing your voice in a world that suddenly seems determined to silence you." He took a breath, fighting to keep his composure. "I found myself questioning everything: the craft I love, the relationships I cherish, even my own worth." He recounted the isolation that followed, the friends who distanced themselves, the studios that quietly turned away, the nights filled with self-doubt. "You start to feel invisible," Jim admitted, "as if your very existence is being erased." The defense attorneys seized on this vulnerability, attempting to frame Jim as a troubled figure, undone by fame and the natural ebbs of a long career. They argued that the pressures were internal, not orchestrated. But Jim's legal team countered with expert testimony from psychologists and counselors who had worked closely with Jim. They detailed the severe anxiety and depression he endured, directly linked to the relentless harassment and sabotage orchestrated by P. Diddy's network. Witnesses added powerful corroboration. A former casting director revealed how meetings were manipulated to exclude Jim, despite his undeniable suitability for roles. Industry insiders testified about strategic smear campaigns, deliberate leaks of private information, and the use of financial incentives to turn allies into silent enemies. One particularly compelling witness was a former member of Diddy's inner circle, who described how the mogul's influence was wielded like a weapon. "It was a coordinated effort," the witness stated, "to remove Jim Carrey from the picture at any cost." Jim's testimony painted a vivid picture of a man caught in a web of deception and betrayal, fighting not just for his career, but for his very identity. "Every day was a battle to keep my sanity," he said, "to hold on to the parts of myself that this campaign was trying to destroy." He spoke openly about the impact on his personal life, the strain on his relationships, the constant fear of public humiliation, and the challenge of maintaining hope in the face of such overwhelming odds. It was like living under a dark cloud that never lifted. As he spoke, the courtroom felt the gravity of the situation. Jurors, witnesses, and spectators were no longer mere observers. They were witnesses to a deeply personal story of resilience and courage. Jim concluded this chapter of his testimony with a heartfelt plea for justice and change. "This isn't just my story," he said. "It's a warning about the power that can destroy lives when left unchecked. We need to stand up, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been silenced by fear and manipulation." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. Outside, the world watched with rapt attention. Social media exploded with support. Discussions about power and accountability in Hollywood intensified, and voices long silenced began to speak out. But the fight was far from over. As Jim stepped down, the defense was readying their response, preparing for the next phase of this landmark trial. The courtroom buzzed with heightened tension as the trial reached its critical phase. Months of investigation, witness testimonies, and mounting evidence had led to this moment, a pivotal confrontation that could determine the fate of two powerful men. Jim Carrey sat poised, his usual vibrant energy replaced by a focused calm, knowing the hardest part of his fight was just beginning. The prosecution called their next witnesses, former employees and insiders with intimate knowledge of P. Diddy's inner workings. One by one, they stepped forward to lay bare a culture of intimidation, manipulation, and ruthless control. These witnesses painted a chilling portrait of an empire built on fear and silence, where dissent was crushed and loyalty was bought. One former executive recounted detailed meetings where plans were laid to systematically exclude Jim Carrey from key projects. We were told to avoid him, to spread rumors quietly, and to make sure he was seen as unreliable in the industry, the witness testified. It was clear that this was orchestrated from the top. Technical experts were then brought in to explain the sophisticated methods used to undermine Jim's career. They described cyber attacks on his personal communications, strategic leaks of private emails, and the use of social media manipulation to sway public opinion. Digital forensics linked many of these actions to accounts controlled by Diddy's associates, providing damning evidence of the scale and intent of the campaign. The defense countered aggressively, attempting to discredit witnesses as disgruntled former employees and questioning the validity of the technical evidence. They argued that Jim's career fluctuations were typical of the entertainment industry and unrelated to any conspiracy. However, the mounting documentary evidence and witness testimonies made these claims increasingly difficult to maintain. In a dramatic turn, the prosecution introduced intercepted communications, recordings of conversations between Diddy and his close advisors discussing the Jim problem and plotting ways to control the narrative and limit his influence. As the audio played in the courtroom, the expressions on the faces of the jury and spectators shifted from skepticism to shock. Throughout the proceedings, Jim's legal team presented a timeline that connected the dots between Diddy's actions and the tangible damage to Jim's career and well-being. Contracts lost, deals canceled, public image tarnished, all traced back to the orchestrated sabotage. Jim himself sat through the testimony with steely resolve, occasionally exchanging glances with his lawyers, his mind focused on the ultimate goal: justice. The defense team attempted to sway the jury with emotional appeals, suggesting Jim was motivated by bitterness or jealousy. Yet, the carefully documented facts and credible testimonies spoke louder than rhetoric. As the day wore on, the courtroom became a battleground of facts versus influence, truth versus power. The prosecution's narrative was clear. This was not a mere coincidence or industry rivalry, but a calculated campaign of character assassination and career sabotage. As the session drew to a close, the judge reminded all parties of the seriousness of the charges and the responsibility of the jury to consider the evidence impartially. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines screamed of explosive revelations, and public opinion began to tilt as more people grasped the scale of the alleged conspiracy. For Jim Carrey, Part 4 marked a turning point, a moment where the dark underbelly of Hollywood's power dynamics was laid bare for all to see. But the final verdict was still far off, and the emotional toll was mounting. As he left the courtroom that day, Jim felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. The fight was far from over, but the truth was finally gaining ground. The courtroom was charged with an almost electric tension as Jim Carrey prepared to deliver the closing chapter of his testimony. The weeks of grueling legal battles, the flood of evidence, and the heartfelt witness accounts had all led to this pivotal moment. Jim knew this was not just a personal reckoning. It was a statement to an entire industry that had long been shrouded in silence and fear. Taking a deep breath, Jim began with a voice steady, yet filled with an unmistakable emotional weight. This trial has been about much more than my lost opportunities or the roles I was denied. It has been about fighting back against a force that sought to strip me of my dignity, my career, and my very identity. He paused, glancing at the jury, searching for connection in their eyes. The attacks were not random or isolated. They were a calculated campaign, one designed to dismantle me piece by piece. I felt the crushing weight of betrayal every day. Friends vanished, trust eroded, and I was left feeling isolated in a world I once thought was mine. Jim's voice cracked slightly as he recounted the toll this had taken on his mental health. The sleepless nights haunted by uncertainty, the moments of despair, and the struggle to hold on to hope. I questioned everything: who I was, what I was worth, and whether my voice still mattered. The defense attorneys sought to seize on this vulnerability, insinuating that Jim's struggles were personal failings or the natural consequences of aging in a ruthless industry. Yet Jim's legal team called forth expert witnesses, psychologists and counselors, who detailed how the relentless harassment and professional sabotage had precipitated severe anxiety and depression. The experts testified that Jim's mental health crisis was a direct consequence of the orchestrated campaign against him. Former insiders stepped forward to paint a chilling picture of a toxic environment perpetuated by P. Diddy and his associates. One witness detailed how meetings were convened to systematically exclude Jim from high-profile projects, how false rumors were strategically seeded in the media, and how financial incentives were used to manipulate industry players. It was an empire built on fear, the witness said, where loyalty was bought and dissent was crushed. In a stunning revelation, documents surfaced outlining the operations of the so-called cleanup crew, a covert group employed to erase evidence, control narratives, and silence whistleblowers. These documents revealed tactics ranging from bribes to legal threats, orchestrated media campaigns, and even efforts to rewrite public records. Jim's legal team masterfully connected these clandestine operations to the damage inflicted upon Jim's career and mental well-being. The courtroom was captivated as the systematic abuse of power was laid bare in meticulous detail. The defense, visibly strained, ramped up their efforts to discredit the witnesses and diminish the credibility of the evidence. They suggested motives of jealousy and bitterness on Jim's part and accused him of fabricating elements of his story. But with each new piece of corroborating testimony, their position grew more precarious. Jim's final address was a powerful, heartfelt plea. This trial is about justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been silenced by those wielding unchecked power. It is about exposing the systems that allow such cruelty to persist and demanding accountability. His words hung heavy in the room, drawing a solemn hush over the courtroom. As the judge prepared to conclude the session, the jury sat in thoughtful silence, grappling with the gravity of the case. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy intensified, with headlines proclaiming the trial's explosive revelations and the broader implications for Hollywood and beyond. Jim emerged from the courtroom exhausted, yet resolute. The path ahead was uncertain, but the courage he had shown was undeniable. His fight had sparked conversations about power, justice, and the need for reform. Regardless of the final verdict, Jim Carrey's testimony had opened a door, a beacon of hope for those who had long suffered in silence. His story was a testament to resilience, truth, and the enduring fight for dignity in the face of overwhelming adversity. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the jury foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. Jim Carrey's heart pounded, each beat echoing the years of struggle, betrayal, and fight that had led him here. The judge's gaze swept across the room, the tension palpable. We, the jury, find the defendant, Sean Combs, guilty of orchestrating a campaign to sabotage Jim Carrey's career through illegal means, the foreperson declared. Relief and vindication flooded Jim. Justice had finally been served, not just for him, but for anyone crushed by abuse of power and manipulation. The empire P. Diddy had built, once seemingly untouchable, was shaken to its core. As Diddy was led away in handcuffs, camera flashes exploded. The media frenzy was instantaneous, headlines screaming scandal and betrayal. Jim stepped outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and reporters. His voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "This victory isn't mine alone," he said. "It's for everyone who's ever been silenced by those who believe they're above the law. Today, we stand for truth, dignity, and justice." Though the battle was won, Jim knew the scars would remain. But with justice on his side, he looked forward to rebuilding, on his own terms. The fight had been brutal, but the victory was sweeter than he had ever imagined. For Jim Carrey, This was not the end, but a new beginning.